Nobody was busier at the trade deadline than the Toronto Blue Jays. They really went out, got big name players, and they're all in right now. They're a team that was sitting back there a little bit behind the Yankees out of the wild card, but they made a bold move.
David Price has been acquired by the Toronto Blue Jays, the best available pitcher at the trade deadline, bar none.
I'm shocked. I think it's unbelievable. Just the people that Alex has went out and got, Troy Tulowitzki, Josh Donaldson, now David Price. These are top of the line names that are coming to a team that's already pretty good. Now it's really good. And you need that one guy every 5 days. They have it. To me, it's a game changer.
12 starts from a guy is not going to, it really doesn't make sense. But the truth of the matter is that David Price, the abstract concept, is a lot different than David Price, the concrete thing. You can get him for 4 starts against the Yankees. You can get him, and now you're pretty much guaranteed that either Price, Burley, or Dickey starts the wild card game if that's what you have to settle for. And it makes this just an incredible, exciting 2 months.
And there is the newest Blue Jay popping out of the tunnel. That is David Price. And doesn't he look good in a Blue Jays uniform? And look at that smile. It tells you all you need to know about what he thinks about being in Toronto. And he gets to say hi to some of the guys he hasn't seen just yet. And he says hello to DeMarlo Hale and Pete Walker, of course. And Pete Walker's got to be thrilled. He's got a new ace. David Price joining the Blue Jays for his first game here tonight.
You can feel the excitement, whenever you're in the dugout. You can feel it in the locker room. I mean, this is a group of guys that want to win, and this is a management in the front office that wants to win. So whenever you can kind of put those things together and then, put it in this city, I guess in this country, they want to win, and that's very important. That's what matters. They can hit homers, man. I mean, they're a tough group to pitch against. It's whenever you're pitching against a team like Toronto, you never have not an easy inning, but an inning where you can kind of be like, all right, I can relax a little bit this inning. I mean, not relax, but you don't have to go full bore. And with this team, you got to be on your P's and Q's, at all times, and that's really tough. It's mentally draining whenever you face a team like this because you constantly have to be in the game mentally. Because if not, I mean, we can put up runs so fast, and it's fun to be a part of that.
Did the popcorn meet your expectations?
Above and beyond, and I think some guys might have taken some before I got here, but I was completely okay with that. This is the best popcorn I've ever had. I mean, I get it every time I come here in big bags full. So that was definitely enough popcorn.
Sportsfeld! It is Sportsfeld Storytime, finally. Something we never do on this show, Jake. We're going to talk about the 2015 Blue Jays a little bit.
What a nice change.
We never talk about 2015 Blue Jays.
Let's look back on an oft-forgotten team that doesn't get enough press.
Under the radar, people forget that the 2015 Blue Jays made a playoff run. You never hear about it. You never hear about the playoffs. You never hear about it.
And they accomplished a lot, and we have those memories to live forever. But only because we remind them. Yes. Yeah.
A magical time, which we will get into a lot over the course of the next 4 weeks. The premise of this specific show, because we have done Blue Jays shows of this vintage. I don't believe we've done 2015. I believe we did the wild card game.
Yes, that would have been 2016.
Correct. And we did some hockey stuff. So I think this is our first foray into the 2015 team. This month's series of episodes will be about one game in particular, and that is August 3rd, 2015, the David Price debut. As good as it gets, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm surprised that this game being in August feels surprising to me.
How do you mean?
It's all July in my head. Like
the deadline start of the 31st.
Was it?
Yeah, man.
Oh man,
I'm surprised. Yeah, because this was all the very, very end of July. They didn't get Tulo until July 28th. It's all very truncated. A very short period of time. Things go. It is
very truncated. Yeah.
Something that is never far from mention in the look back at this time is we are talking about a 500 baseball team prior to the lifting of the Jose Reyes era. They were middling, but this was the first time that I think we were like 100% on board with the fact that they were outscoring teams by a truly absurd amount and were not quite seeing the results at the same place. So the Tulo trade, they were 41-36, so not 500. But pardon me, that's the wrong day. The Tulo trade, they were 50-51 on July 28th. They weren't even above 500. 8 games back of the division, 50-51, 4 games back of the wild card. Truly among the more absurd weekends and weeks of my life. We will get into that in a little bit. But off the top, what do you remember of the pre-Tulo trade 2015 time?
I remember there was like a lot, and heavy underline a lot, of talk about the run differential and how like they were very clearly much better than their record suggested, which is kind of funny in retrospect when you think about like there were a few additions throughout the season, obviously, not just Price and Tulo, but like they didn't make a ton of like wholesale changes to go from a 1 game under 500 team to 30 games over 500 team. So I feel like we were all kind of, there was like, it wasn't quite impatience, I don't think, but it was definitely like it felt like we were waiting for them to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is not that long after infamously the Jays had a pretty good team. I want to say 2013 or 2014 where they were pretty good and they didn't do anything at the trade deadline. Yeah, and Batista famously was like really disappointed in that. And I know I personally expected that to happen again. I expected to say, well, it's a 500 team. They're pretty good, but there's obviously a lot. I think similar to how we talked about this team last year, whereas they have strengths, but maybe their weaknesses are a little too big. And boy, did that change quickly.
And those like, I feel like we had those memories too, because like 2014 was that season where they were in first place into 60, 70 games played that season. And they were sort of, I remember there was the game in August that year against, the only reason I remember this was because I was in PEI and the game was like 19 innings long and it was still going like by the time I landed for my connecting flight, and had been going for several hours before that. And I feel like around that time they were like a game or two out of the wild card and then just August, September collapsed. So yeah, I think there were expectations of them being a semi-decent team. And then, Stroman got hurt in spring training, which was like, oh, well, there goes our staff ace. Because then we were relying on like Dickey and Burley to be kind of the guys. Mm-hmm. Who like did fine in regular season. No, nothing against them. But it was, I feel like it was, we were all ready for there to be something like a little more.
And boy, was there something a little more. I know that I've maybe mentioned this once or twice in the show because, first of all, we were still doing shows at this point. But this is one of those, it's always going to be really crystallized in my mind because this whole week was a huge event with me and all my friends. It started off with the Tulowitzki trade, and I was dating the woman who would become my wife shortly after. We had been dating for June, July, 2.5 months at this point. And we were going to a wedding, and this wedding was going to be the first time she had met sort of my core group of college friends. So the guys that I, grew up with, and I was living with my roommate Zach at the time. And we were in bed. She's a baseball reporter, as people often know. We were in bed on the evening of July 28th because I was about to leave for the wedding was in Cornwall, Ontario, which is not far from the Quebec border, which is not far, of course, from Montreal. And the plan was the wedding was on Saturday. The plan was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is Montreal time with the fellas. And then we would all meet up on Friday in Cornwall and party as a bigger group, and then the weekend is the wedding, yada yada yada. So we are in bed because the Tulowitzki trade happened in the middle of the night. It was like, I want to say 1 a.m. or like midnight, 11 o'clock. It was really, 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 really late, and we are in bed. I remember this so well. Enjoying our last evening before we spend some time apart and reconvene on the weekend. And she gets a text from somebody on the desk at her office asking her how to spell Tulowitzki. And I was like, why do you need to know? Why do you need to know how to spell Tulowitzki? And he had been traded to the friggin' Blue Jays. And that, I don't know about you. Obviously it wasn't, but at the time that was enough for me. That was all I needed to see because her and I had gone to Chicago earlier that month because they played the White Sox in July 6th. They played the White Sox on the road. We went to a doubleheader sort of day. We saw Cardinals, Cubs at Wrigley, and then we went to the other stadium. I think it's called Guaranteed Rate Field now. And we got to watch Chris Sale against Mark Burley. It was an hour and 54-minute game. But famously in that game, Jose Reyes lets a ball go right through him to lose the game, and I remember being like, "I'm 100% done with Jose Reyes. If he never we were so excited about him a couple years earlier. I'm completely done. I don't care if he ever plays again." And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, Troy Tulowitzki becomes the starting shortstop on the Toronto Blue Jays. I was awake for another 2.5 hours, like tweeting nonstop and laughing and gifs and excitement. How did you process that moment?
Yeah, I remember, you're right. I had kind of forgotten in the sort of haze of it all, the very loud Jose Reyes criticism and how everyone was kind of done with him at that point. His defense wasn't up to par. He just wasn't the guy that we thought he might be. And then it was like, okay, this is sort of one of the missing pieces. I feel like I've told this story before. I was at Sneaky D's when the Tulo trade came down.
Every story of this era for you were at Sneaky D's.
I was at Sneaky D's.
It's like 4 years, but that's the only building you were in.
I mean, that's not entirely inaccurate. I was with a friend of the show, Jacob Kramer. I believe it was a Monday night, I want to say, because I believe we were at karaoke. And we were kind of like, we were in that weird time where you don't really want to be out that late or drink that much. It was just kind of a go hang out kind of evening. Mm-hmm. And the Tulo news, I got the push alert on my phone at whatever time that would have been, 12:30 or so.
It was late.
That they got Tulo. And I remember I didn't process it properly. Not that I didn't know who Troy Tulowitzki was, but I had to Google him to because it just was it was it can't be that Troy Tulowitzki.
Right. And we saw the stats, but it's not like we were out here watching Rockies games.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember I remember very clearly shoving my phone into Kramer's face and him just kind of looking at it with disbelief. And then we immediately ordered a round of shots. And it turned into one of those evenings of we'll just go for a couple. But then because of Tulo, we were there till 2:30 in the morning. And I remember getting home and I was still roommates with Chris Lund at that point, and he was still awake for the same reason. And just being like, oh my God, they're doing it. They're finally doing it. And like you said, that was all we needed. It was okay, Tulowitzki, amazing.
And obviously adding a guy like Troy, we're getting the best shortstop in baseball in our minds. and those opportunities don't present themselves. So we're just thrilled, and we improved the two spots today. We weren't too thrilled about trading some of our better prospects like we did in this deal for rentals. And that's not to say we're out of the rental market or we won't look at it. We've had discussions about players that are only available for 2 months. But that being said, it's a rare opportunity to get better, and getting better doesn't have to mean a reliever or a starter. When you have a chance to get the best player at a respective position and a guy that also brings some intangibles as well, rare opportunities, and we wanted to take advantage of it. Again, we're always focused on the short and the long term, and we felt like an acquisition like this addressed both. I think you certainly have a list of things you'd like to accomplish, just like you would in any offseason. But at the end of the day, you won't. If you have the opportunity to just improve the club, we'll do that. That might be offensively, like we did here. It might be from a run prevention standpoint. So any opportunity to improve the club, we'll take it. I mean, there's no order. We can't dictate the order that things are going to happen, whether we acquire a reliever first or position player or starter. So we're just looking at it that we can't control the market, timing, what teams are willing to do. As opportunities present themselves, if we are in favor of the deals and we like them, we'll obviously try to get them done.
12:28 a.m. was Ken Rosenthal's breaking Troy Tulowitzki traded the Blue Jays. 12:28 a.m. This is supposed to be a David Price episode, and that we are obviously David Price. Tulowitzki was great, and we were very excited. But David Price was the big fish. As good as the Tulowitzki deal was, and as much as they did need, as I said with Reyes, they needed help defensively on the infield, and that ended up being a huge part of what made this all so successful. David Price was the big fish, and it didn't start after the trade. It actually was before. I have some tweets here from me from July 23rd, which is a whole week before it actually happened, that I said, willing to make large personal sacrifices to the baseball gods if the Jays bring in David Price. That's July 23rd, a full week plus before he comes on board. It was one of those things where it seemed like, and this used to happen a lot actually, around 2013, 2014, 2015. Not as much anymore, but reporters used to just throw the Blue Jays into rumors because we have a really rabid online fan base. Do you remember that? It happened all the time.
John Morosi was the king of that. Like every third trust this rumor.
Yeah.
Right.
July 25th, a couple days later, still before the Tulo trade, David Price has drawn interest from Blue Jays, Dodgers, and Cubs. Tigers unsure whether they will move him or not. And because it was Morosi, I was like, oh, it's Dodgers and Cubs. Like, obviously it's Dodgers and Cubs.
Right.
But no, a day later, July 24th, 2015, I figured it out. Baseball gods, if you bring David Price to Toronto, I will give up beer for the entirety of his time with the organization.
I remember the day we got Price, because it came down like mid-afternoon, I want to say, or like early afternoon.
Yeah, it was in the, yeah.
And like, I'm pretty sure my dad and I were supposed to go to lunch that day, because I remember he got to my house and he was like, "Are you ready to go?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Ken Rosenthal just said the Blue Jays and David Price are close." And then I remember we like stayed inside kind of just like waiting on Twitter for an hour or so. Actually, I have no idea how long it was. It could have been 10 minutes waiting to see if it was legitimately going to happen or not.
Yeah. To give you sort of a timeline of my week there, we started out, as I said, in bed with Melissa hearing the Tulowitzki trade news. My roommate and I then went to the game the next day before we left from Montreal. We went to Blue Jays Phillies. They lost. Tulowitzki was not there yet. If you remember, he didn't have his passport on him, but LaTroy Hawkins did, and pitched in that game immediately. Which, by the way, you want to talk about why they needed David Price. Felix Doubront started that game for the Blue Jays.
Also just to get I think to paint a good picture of sort of the excitement around that team before the good players got here. I remember you, me, and your roommate Zach going to a game earlier in the year because it was Chris Colabello's first game, and we were all in, just let's Colabello, first baseman, finally, let's go.
Yes, and we were sort of right. He ended up being pretty good.
Yeah.
And then Tulo's first game, which was, I would say, probably Tulo's best game as a Blue Jay, probably.
Yeah.
We had gotten to Montreal. We had checked into our hotel, and we had gone to a bar just in time to watch him lead off the fucking game with a double, and then hit an absolute bomb off the second deck in the third inning.
Long deep drive. Welcome to Toronto. Troy Tulowitzki. 2-run home run.
Man, oh man. The first Tulowitzki game, obviously the first David Price game is it's just a little bit bigger, but man, the first Tulo game was also just absolute magic.
The first Tulo game was also like David Price was a full house. Everyone was all in. The Tulo game was a pretty average midweek kind of crowd too, which I think lends it to a lesser reception, I think.
Right.
Because it was just kind of okay, it's a Wednesday night. There's 20,000 people here. And then he went off and everyone's like, oh, okay.
And he's feeling comfortable, hanging, breaking ball, see ya. That ball was crushed to left field.
To continue that timeline, then of course we are partying in Montreal. And as you said, the David Price news came down the next day. So my friends and I are in our hotel room, sleeping off our hangovers, and we are leaving for brunch. We are going to go to brunch. And then the sort of David Price of the Blue Jays is close, starts happening. So you need to picture just like you and your dad. It was 2 more hours of us sitting in the dark, refreshing our phones until we got David Price. And then we're grown men. We're 29 years old, jumping up and down on beds, screaming and clapping. And then we went out and got loaded. I got absolutely loaded because I couldn't drink beer. So now I'm just drinking hard alcohol.
That's right.
Boy, oh boy, that was a day. What a time. And then, of course, famously, the next thing that happens is the Blue Jays play 3 games against the Kansas City Royals. So we are...
Oh, that's right. That was fight weekend.
Donaldson gets hit by a pitch, and he doesn't like that too much. And Donaldson has something to say to Volquez. And it looks as though there has been a warning put in place by the home plate umpire, which I don't agree with at all.
The 3-2 pitch is low. Ball 4. Donaldson flips the bat and goes trotting on down to first base. Volquez came off the mound halfway to the plate. It's almost like Edinson wants a confrontation.
He is continuing to bring it upon himself. Jerry, I got a funny feeling there's going to be some fireworks here this afternoon.
Tulowitzki is hit. And Donaldson is screaming at home plate umpire Jim Wolf.
Donaldson is standing there talking with Jim Wolf and said, how many guys are going to have to get hit before you respond to the warning? Hollering at Jim Wolf, the home plate umpire, saying you're going to let him take shots of me all afternoon? Gibbons is going to come out to intervene. Bautista was there first to keep Donaldson into the game.
The Royals really pitching inside to Toronto, and that has made the Jays angry. Next offering, and that was at Escobar. Now both benches were warned, and they've thrown Sanchez out of the game.
Being held by his teammates.
Volquez got into it in the White Sox bench clearing ball.
It sure was. So Saturday at the wedding, we were watching Jays Royals in a pew on our phone. Sunday, we are driving back to Toronto from Montreal, listening to the game on the radio. And as you said, it was fight weekend. As that fight happens, we are in 3 different cars, so excited that we pull over to a rest stop so we can get out of our cars and like shove each other with excitement. I've never, not since nor before, have I ever seen this happen with my, like, we all love sports and we have fun, but this was like, we couldn't handle it. It was so foreign. It had been so long since the team meant this much to anybody, and since they were this good, other than like maybe the day they traded for Jose Reyes, like that next day we were all really excited.
Yeah.
But this was insanity. This was just complete and utter insanity. 45,000 people in attendance. We're pulling over on the 401. Like, we'll never have anything ever like it again, I don't think. And with that being the year it was, we had a ballpark pass. So
that's right.
It starts with Tulo. We get to Montreal, and it's Tulo's debut. They trade for him the next day. The fight happens on the drive home, and then Monday off, we return to the city to go to the fucking David Price game. It was as good as sports get in my adult life.
Yeah, I remember that KC game, like the really big brawl game. I remember being in my living room, and like this is like an end of July game. Like this is like game like 90 of the season. I remember just being in my living room screaming at the television, like cursing the Kansas City Royals to the ends of the earth. And like that game, because you're right, because I forgot that was the timeline of it, but it does make sense because it was that was just an extremely infuriating game. But also coupled with the excitement of the days before and the days to come, it was really like, that was the beginning of So What, Fuck You. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So it was just like...
It was fucking on. And I believe David Price was in the dugout waving and drinking Tim Hortons.
I think you're right. Because there's the whole popcorn thing.
Holy shit.
He loves
holy
the popcorn.
Shit, was I ever in the tank for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that brings us up to the moment. And that is David Price out of the bullpen onto the mound. And we will get into what that was like in the stadium and how the game went in the next episode of Sportsfeld Storytime.